Sir, I need you to move to seat 32B, the flight attendant said, her tone clipped and firm. We have a family that needs to sit together, and your seat is the only one available. The old man looked up from his aisle seat, the one he'd carefully booked months ago, paying extra to accommodate a service-related injury. I chose this seat for medical reasons, he said, his voice quiet but steady. She didn't waver. If you don't move, we can't close the doors. So he stood. Limping slightly, he made his way down the aisle and lowered himself into seat 32B, tight, cramped, in pain, and now between two strangers. 9 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. What he did next would change the meaning of that flight, and everyone's memory of it. Forever. Here's what really happened. The rain. Early boarding call echoed through Terminal C at Denver International Airport. It was just past 6:30 a.m., but Frank Delaney had been at Gate 27 for over an hour. His hands folded neatly in his lap, posture upright, the stillness of discipline clung to him like a second skin. At 78, Frank looked every bit the old man he was. Soft tan jacket, black slacks, worn-out walking shoes. But those who watched closely might have noticed the limp, subtle, but telling. His left knee didn't bend quite right. That wasn't age. It was a remnant of war. Frank had booked this flight 3 months in advance. He was heading from Rock Springs, Wyoming to Annapolis, Maryland, to watch his granddaughter graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy. She'd be the first in the family to wear the uniform since him, and he wouldn't miss it for the world. That's why he'd spent a chunk of his modest pension on seat 14C, aisle seat, premium economy, just enough legroom to keep the pain manageable, not a luxury, a necessity. When his group was called, Frank boarded early. No fuss, no help. A quiet thank you to the gate agent, a steady hand on the rail, and slow, deliberate steps down the jet bridge. He settled into his seat carefully, placed a small duffel under the seat in front, and exhaled. Relief. Just for a moment. Then the trouble started. 3 rows ahead, someone flagged down a flight attendant. She was in her 30s, uniform crisp, smile. Practiced. Her name tag read Kayla. She spoke with the passenger, tapped something on her tablet, frowned, then turned and walked straight to Frank. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently. "Are you in 14C? "Yes, ma'am." She knelt slightly to meet his eyes, still smiling. "We have a mother with 2 young children. They were seated separately during booking. Your row is the only spot where they can sit together." Frank's brow creased. "This is my seat. I booked it early due to a service-related knee injury." Kayla's smile didn't falter, but her tone shifted. "I understand, sir. We'd really appreciate your cooperation. Just for this flight." Frank leaned back, silence settling between them. He wasn't trying to be difficult, but moving meant 5 hours of discomfort, maybe worse. He looked toward the front of the plane. A young mother stood holding a toddler, 2 other kids clustered beside her. He glanced down at his hands, steady, scarred, familiar. "What's the alternative?" he asked quietly. Kayla tapped her screen again. "Seat 32B, it's a middle seat, near the back. It's the only unoccupied seat left." Frank blinked. Middle seat. No legroom, no stretch, near the lavatory, near the turbulence. He knew the plane's layout by heart. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, firm but polite. "I can't sit there. My leg won't hold up." Kayla's voice cooled just a shade. "Sir, I do understand, but we need to seat this family together. If you decline, we may not be able to depart on time." There it was, the subtle threat. He'd be holding up the flight. He looked around. People were watching now. The cabin had gone still. Judgment hung heavy in the air. One old man standing in the way of a mother and her kids. His jaw clenched. "This isn't acceptable," he said quietly. "I'll note that, sir," Kayla replied. "But I need a decision." A breath. Then another. Slowly, Frank unbuckled his seatbelt. He pushed himself upright, gripping the headrest in front of him. His voice low but unwavering. "Frank Delaney, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. Please note, I'm giving up a medically necessary seat under pressure." Kayla nodded without a word and gestured for the family to move forward. Frank gathered his bag and shuffled down the aisle. As he passed, the toddler looked up and smiled. Frank gave a small nod. No resentment. Just quiet resignation. Seat 32B was exactly what he'd expected. Tight, wedged between a college kid in headphones and a businessman already claiming both. Armrests. The overhead light didn't work. The air reeked faintly of bleach and burnt coffee. He sat down slowly, grimacing as his leg bent awkwardly. He said nothing. Just rested his hands in his lap and closed his eyes. No one noticed him. No one offered help, but what happened next would make sure he wasn't forgotten. No one said a word. But someone had been watching. 3 rows ahead, across the aisle, a woman in her 40s sat quietly, laptop still on her tray table, blazer folded neatly beside her. She had boarded just before Frank and had seen it all, heard the conversation. Watched the quiet way he gave in. Now she watched him hunched in seat 32B, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders drawn in. She didn't pull out her phone to record. She wasn't interested in outrage. Instead, she opened her messages and typed a note to a contact, someone in customer relations at the airline. Passenger Frank Delaney, forced to give up aisle seat 14C despite confirmed booking and medical. Need. Now in 32B, crew dismissive, flight TC306, please escalate. She hit send. Then closed her phone and looked out the window. She didn't know what would come of it, but some moments call for action, not silence. Even if no one else moves, you do. Back in 32B, Frank Delaney sat still, hands folded over his stomach. The middle seat always made you feel smaller, but this felt like fading away. His knee throbbed. Every few minutes he shifted, just enough to keep the pain from locking in, but there was nowhere to go. His left leg pressed awkwardly against the seat in front. The college student to his right kept his headphones on. The businessman on his left never once acknowledged him, hogging the armrest like it was his birthright. Frank didn't speak, didn't sigh, didn't complain. He just sat, quiet and still. He wasn't angry, just tired. He'd lived long enough to know how it felt to be inconvenient. Charlotte Hayes, the woman in the blazer, watched from the corner of her eye. She noticed his hands, the knuckles. The finger bent just slightly to the side. Not from age, from injury. They rested on his lap like stone, but she could see it. The tension. Something was being held in. Pain. Maybe sadness. Maybe just the weight of being dismissed again. When the flight attendants did final checks, none of them looked at Frank. No apology, no eye contact, just a cursory nod, a tug on the overhead bin, and they moved on. Then her phone buzzed. A reply. Forwarding? To ops. Unacceptable. Will notify cabin if escalated. She didn't expect much, but at least someone knew. The cabin doors closed with a dull thud. The safety video began. Frank leaned back, eyes shut. The hum of the engines blended with memories. Boots in wet jungle, a medic's voice, the crack of gunfire. He shifted again, wincing. His hand reached for the armrest, but the businessman's elbow stayed firm. Still, Frank said nothing. In the cockpit, Captain David Miller adjusted his headset. Former Air Force, 23 years of service, 11,000 flight hours, a man shaped by discipline and duty. As the co-pilot read the final checklist, a red alert flashed on his console. Passenger concern flagged by corporate liaison. David tapped the screen. A message opened. Passenger Frank Delaney. Issue: veteran forced from medically necessary seat. Flight TC306. Escalation requested. A name followed. Charlotte Hayes, Diamond Elite, PR board advisor. David blinked. Delaney. The name stirred something. He turned in his seat. Hold the taxi, he said. His co-pilot looked over. Captain, hold position. I'll be back in 3. David unbuckled, stepped into the galley, and motioned to the lead flight attendant. She was older, composed. Her name tag read, Arlene, who was moved from seat 14C. She hesitated, then pointed toward the back. A man. To seat 32B. We needed space for a family. David didn't flinch. No judgment. Just calm, controlled purpose. He adjusted the cuffs on his uniform, smoothed the gold stripes on his shoulders, and walked. Charlotte noticed him first. The energy shifted. The cockpit door opening did more than draw glances. It hushed the plane. Passengers turned. Phones lowered. The captain didn't demand attention. He earned it. He stopped at row 32. Frank, eyes half shut, opened them to find a tall man in full captain's uniform standing before him. Frank blinked, confused. His shoulders stiffened. Then Captain David. Miller raised his right hand and offered a crisp, formal salute. The cabin went still. Charlotte felt it first. The hush, the respect. Frank stared, eyes wide. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, the captain said, voice even and clear. On behalf of Transcontinental Airlines, and as a fellow serviceman, I offer you my deepest apologies. Frank blinked, slowly. You should not have been asked to move from your seat. The captain turned toward Arlene and gestured with a slight nod. Please escort Mr. Delaney back to 14C. Frank didn't move at first. He looked around, still unsure. Was this real? The businessman beside him shifted, suddenly aware. The student took off his headphones. Sir, the captain said again, more gently, we're honored to have you aboard. Let's make sure you travel with the dignity you've earned. Frank's throat tightened. His voice caught as he finally said, Yes, sir. He stood, slower this time, but with pride. As he walked up the aisle, passengers watched in silence, some with tears, some with shame. A woman handed him his bag. A man near the front stood up to give a small nod. Seat 14C waited for him, untouched. Captain Miller walked back to the cockpit. No speech, no announcement. He didn't need one. Some actions speak louder than anything you could ever say. Captain David Miller's voice filled the cabin. Let me be clear. We will not take off while injustice sits quietly in our cabin. A hush swept the plane. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He fought in Khe Sanh, Vietnam. He wore the uniform longer than most of us have drawn breath. He didn't ask for special treatment, only to remain in the seat he booked so his leg wouldn't lock up from a service injury. He paused. We failed him. David's voice softened but did not waver. But we don't leave our own behind. Not in combat. Not at 30,000 feet. His eyes swept the aisle, toward Charlotte, toward the veteran quietly crying 2 rows behind her, toward the passengers who had once looked away but now sat straighter, watching. And if that means this flight runs 10 minutes late, he added, then I'll take every one of those minutes with pride. He clicked off the mic. The cabin, breathless, exploded into applause. Not loud, not forced. It started with one pair of hands, then another and another, until the sound rolled down the plane like a rising tide. Frank Delaney didn't raise a hand. He didn't bow his head. He just sat there, still, silent, seen. Charlotte wiped the corner of her eye. For the first time in years, she believed something she'd almost forgotten. Honor doesn't fade. It just waits for the right moment to rise again. The plane landed just after noon in Annapolis, Maryland. The wheels kissed the runway with a gentle hum. Sunlight filtered through the windows like a quiet blessing. As passengers rose and gathered their things, Frank remained in 1A, hands calm on his knees. He wasn't in a hurry. For once, he didn't feel forgotten. At the door, the flight crew thanked him. Not out of habit, but with weight, with meaning. And as Charlotte passed him in the jet bridge, she paused, touched his shoulder and whispered, You reminded us who we're supposed to be. His granddaughter waited at baggage claim, midshipman uniform sharp, standing tall with a handmade sign, Welcome, Grandpa Frank. The moment she saw him limping forward, she dropped the sign and ran. He didn't brace. He let her hit him full force, like a wave crashing into a seawall. Your knees, she gasped, pulling back. He smiled. I've had worse. And this time, the smile reached all the way to his eyes. They sat together for hours that afternoon, talking about her studies, her ship placement, her dreams after commissioning. When she asked about the flight, puzzled by the buzz of news alerts and texts, Frank kept it simple. "I had a bad seat," he said, "and someone stood up." She nodded. But that night, when she saw the video, recorded quietly by a stranger and now making its rounds, of Captain Miller's voice declaring, "We don't leave our own behind," she cried. Then she hugged him again and didn't let go. A week later, a letter arrived. Transcontinental Airlines. Inside was a formal apology, a full refund, and a card. "Dear Mr. Delaney, as of today, you are designated a lifetime guest of honor with Transcontinental Airlines. No more booking codes, no more fees. Just tell us where you're going. We'll get you there. TCA Veterans." Counsel. He folded the letter, placed it beside the flag in his study, and said nothing. 2 weeks later, another envelope came. This one was hand-addressed. Seal in the corner, Department of the Army, Office of Military Records. Inside, a short, typed note. "After a public inquiry, your personnel file was reopened." A retired officer working in archiving located an overlooked combat report from February 1968, Quezon. It documents that Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney pulled 6 wounded Marines from a burning transport under enemy fire, despite a knee already shattered by shrapnel. The file had been marked incomplete and lost during that chaotic period. It has now been restored. At the bottom, General James E. Lockhart, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, and a second page, handwritten, "Frank, I was Corporal Turber 3 in that vehicle. You don't know me, but I've known you every day since. I made it. Home. I made a family. I made a life. Because a Marine who limped worse than me refused to let go. Thank you. You were never invisible, not to us." General J. Lockhart, Ret., United States Marine Corps. Frank sat with the letter for a long, long time. No music, no ceremony, just sunlight falling through the study window, and a man finally, truly, remembered. No words. Just silence and breath. Elsewhere, in a quiet home office in Richmond, Virginia, Charlotte Hayes typed steadily on her laptop. She didn't embellish, she didn't dramatize, she just told the story as it happened. The man who was asked to move. The captain who stood up. The silence that turned into a standing ovation. She submitted it to a regional publication. It got picked up. Local news ran it, then national. By week's end, the salute at 32B had become a headline. A story read aloud at school assemblies. A post printed and tacked to the wall of 100 VFW halls. The photo of Frank sitting in 1A, head bowed, sunlight falling gently on his weathered hands, became something of an icon, not of fame, of remembrance. Frank Delaney didn't change much after that, still lived in the same small house in Rock Springs, still drank his coffee black, still limped to the mailbox every morning, even when it hurt. But something inside him had shifted. He held his head just a bit higher when he walked. He didn't flinch when strangers approached, and sometimes when he sat on the porch at dusk watching the sun dip behind the hills, he smiled, not because he was proud, but because, for the first time in a long, long while, he had been seen. Not all sacrifices are written in medals. Not all battles end with banners, but sometimes all it takes is one voice to say, "We remember." And when that happens, a seat becomes more than a seat. It becomes something sacred, a return to dignity, a return to honor, a return to home in Nai. Our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry, isn't being ignored, isn't invisible, and sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to The Silent Wound, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.